Hello friends, welcome to Soft History Stories. Today we will tell a story about the real hygiene habits of Victorian people. It is a brisk morning in Victorian London, and the city is alive with the hum of progress, though it is a progress marked by contradiction. The streets are teeming with people, thousands of workers trudging towards the factories, merchants pushing their carts through narrow lanes, and families weaving between crowded marketplaces. The city is expanding at an unprecedented rate, driven by the Industrial Revolution. Smoke billows from the towering chimneys of factories, darkening the sky and casting a perpetual gray pall over the streets. The air is thick with the acrid smell of burning coal, the cries of workers, and the clatter of machines as the gears of progress churn relentlessly forward. The streets are chaotic, an ever-moving river of humanity that seems to have no end. Horses pull carts laden with goods through the busy thoroughfares, and the sound of hammering and shouting echoes from every corner. The sidewalks are crowded with people on their way to work, many with their faces hidden beneath scarves or masks to shield themselves from the filth that fills the air. The rapid growth of the city has led to a sprawling urban landscape of narrow, winding streets, smoke-darkened buildings, and overcrowded tenements that seem to rise taller each year. But for all the external signs of progress, there is a deeper, more insidious problem that lurks beneath the surface. While the factories hum with activity and the city's skyline grows ever higher, the streets are plagued by a different kind of growth, one that is less visible but more dangerous. The city's rapid expansion has outpaced its infrastructure. Poor sanitation, overcrowded living conditions, and the spread of disease are becoming ever more pressing concerns, and yet no one seems to have a clear solution. The divide between the wealthy and the working class is stark. The elite live in areas far from the smog, in cleaner, more spacious neighborhoods, their homes fitted with private baths and proper waste disposal systems. The poor, on the other hand, are left to suffer in squalor. They live in cramped, unsanitary tenements, where the air is thick with the stench of human waste and the streets are littered with garbage. These conditions create a breeding ground for disease, and the threat of cholera and typhoid is never far from the minds of those who dwell in the city's most impoverished corners. As the city grows, so do the health crises that come with it. The rapid pace of industrialization has created a perfect storm of public health disasters. Cholera outbreaks are common, particularly in the slums where clean drinking water is scarce. The contaminated water from open wells and rivers, polluted by industrial waste, spreads disease with alarming speed. In the marketplaces, food is sold in the open air, unregulated, and exposed to dirt, disease, and flies. The working class, who have no choice but to buy their food from these unsanitary vendors, suffer the most. Many fall ill from foodborne diseases, their bodies weakened by poor nutrition and unsanitary conditions. The wealthy, who can afford better food and cleaner water, are largely unaffected, their lives untouched by the squalor and disease that plague the poorer districts. Despite the worsening situation, the government's response is sluggish at best. Public health measures, if they exist, are inconsistent and ineffective. Sanitation systems are outdated, and waste management is poorly regulated. Public awareness of the link between hygiene and disease is minimal, and the growing population puts even more strain on an already inadequate public health system. Calls for change are beginning to rise, particularly from social reformers and concerned citizens. But the powerful elite, who benefit from the current system, are resistant to reform. They dismiss the plight of the working class as a matter of personal responsibility, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the systemic issues that perpetuate poverty and disease. With each new outbreak, the pressure on the government to act grows. The working class, already suffering from the physical demands of factory work, is now battling the invisible enemy of disease. The conditions in which they live are increasingly untenable. Their homes are overcrowded, with multiple families sharing a single, unsanitary living space. Disease spreads quickly in such cramped conditions, and medical care is often out of reach. The doctors who treat the wealthy are few and far between in the slums, and those who can afford care are few in number. Meanwhile, the wealthier classes are insulated from the crisis, their neighborhoods still relatively free from the grip of disease. In the industrialized parts of the city, Workers begin to question whether the cost of progress is worth the price they are paying. They see their friends and families falling ill, their children suffering from conditions that could have been prevented, and they wonder, what good is industrialization if it destroys the very people it was meant to serve? The divide between the classes becomes more than just an economic issue. It is a public health crisis, one that is slowly eroding the social fabric of the city. The conflict, though still in its early stages, is palpable. The government's inaction, the indifference of the elite, and the growing unrest among the working class create an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty. People begin to demand action, but the government remains slow to respond. Caught between the demands of the rich and the voices of the poor, they dismiss the plight of the working class as a matter of personal responsibility, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the systemic issues that perpetuate poverty and disease. With each new outbreak, the pressure on the government to act grows. The working class, already suffering from the physical demands of factory work, is now battling the invisible enemy of disease. The conditions in which they live are increasingly untenable. But will the city's leaders listen, or will they continue to turn a blind eye to the suffering around them? Will the working class continue to bear the brunt of this health crisis, or will they rise up to demand change? In the heart of this industrial city, the clash between progress and public health looms large, and the fate of the people, both rich and poor, hangs in the balance. The streets of Victorian London are alive with the bustling energy of a rapidly industrializing city. Everywhere you look, people are moving, walking hurriedly down cobblestone streets, carrying sacks of goods, and shouting to one another from behind market stalls. In the midst of this chaos, the markets themselves are the beating heart of the city, overflowing with fruits, vegetables, meats, and fish. The air is thick with the aroma of fresh produce, mingling with the heavier scent of unwashed bodies and animal carcasses hanging in the open air. The scene is vibrant, full of life. Yet beneath this surface vibrancy lies a hidden danger. You walk through the market, the cobblestones beneath your feet worn smooth from years of foot traffic. The vendors are calling out, advertising their wares, but there's a tension in the air that you can't quite put your finger on. The food looks fresh, at least on the surface. But as you look closer, you begin to notice the slight sheen of grease on the cuts of meat, the dullness of the fish eyes, and the faint smell of something sour that lingers in the air. These are the signs that something is amiss. The lack of refrigeration has left food vulnerable to spoilage, and the danger of contamination lurks just beneath the surface. It's a truth that most of the people walking through the market don't see. They're focused on the price, the speed at which they can grab what they need, and the constant rush of life that defines the industrial age. But you, who know the city well, can see beyond the hustle and bustle. You can see the way the meat sits in the heat, the flies circling the open cuts, and the way the vendors wipe their hands on their aprons before handing you your change. You know that these simple everyday moments have the power to cause great harm that will spread quickly through the crowded tenements where the poorest live, through the homes where food safety is an afterthought, and through the bustling workhouses that are teeming with vulnerable people. The lack of refrigeration is the root of this problem. In an age where industrialization has brought about incredible advancements, food storage remains stuck in the past. Without the technology to preserve food for longer periods, it is often left to spoil quickly. The meat, once fresh, is now on the verge of turning, and yet it is still being sold to the unsuspecting public. The fish, once caught in the river, has been sitting in the open air for hours. It's a simple reality of life in Victorian London. If you want food, you buy it when you can, no matter the cost to your health. You notice the women at the butcher's stall, mothers, young wives, and daughters picking out cuts of meat for their families, their hands shaking slightly as they reach for the best pieces. They don't know that the meat has been hanging in the open for hours, exposed to the air and the elements. They don't realize that the meat, once fresh, is now crawling with bacteria. They take the meat home, wrap it up in whatever scraps of cloth they have, and prepare it for dinner, not knowing that they're preparing a feast for the microbes that will soon wreak havoc on their family's health. For the wealthier classes, food safety is a concern that can be easily managed. They have access to refrigerators, ice boxes, and better food storage systems, keeping their food fresh for longer periods. But for the working class, Food safety is a luxury they cannot afford. They rely on what is available in the markets, often buying the cheapest cuts of meat, vegetables that are close to spoiling, and fruits that have been overripe for days. There is no regulation, no oversight. The poor, it seems, are left to fend for themselves, paying the price for the convenience of cheap food, while the city's elite continue to dine on carefully prepared meals, unaware of the dangers faced by those beneath them. The lack of sanitation in the markets compounds the problem. The vendors, many of whom are barely scraping by, have little interest in maintaining cleanliness. Their stalls are messy, with raw meat lying beside vegetables, unwashed and left uncovered. The dust from the busy streets settles on everything, and the occasional rat scurries between the food, unnoticed by those too busy to care. But the rats know what they're doing. They're feeding off the scraps that fall from the stalls, spreading filth and disease with every step. At the same time, people in the crowded workhouses and tenements have little recourse. Their homes lack basic plumbing or even a steady water supply. They use what they can to prepare food, often resorting to boiling whatever scraps they can get their hands on. The lack of sanitation in their homes means that food often gets contaminated before it even makes it to the table. Their children suffer the most, with the lack of proper nutrition and the constant exposure to contaminated food causing them to fall ill with alarming frequency. As the city faces repeated outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, and other foodborne illnesses, the public begins to wake up to the reality of their situation. But it is too late for many. The disease spreads quickly, taking lives in the poorest districts, where the population is most vulnerable. Mothers watch as their children waste away from dysentery, their bodies weakened by poor nutrition and contaminated food. Fathers work themselves to the bone in the factories, but their health is failing because of the poor food and water they rely on to survive. There is a growing movement in the city to address these issues. Public health reformers begin to push for changes in food safety regulations, calling for inspections of markets, better hygiene standards for food vendors, and the implementation of food storage systems that could keep food safe for longer. These reformers are fighting an uphill battle, however. The wealthy elite, who are largely unaffected by the food safety issues, resist any changes that might disrupt the status quo. They see the changes as unnecessary and as a threat to their profits. It is the poor, the workers, the mothers and children who suffer, while the rich continue to live in their sanitized, protected worlds. As the calls for food safety regulations grow louder, the city's leaders begin to take notice. The first small steps toward reform are taken, but it is clear that much more needs to be done. The markets are slowly cleaned up. New laws are passed to regulate the sale of food, and the importance of hygiene in food preparation begins to take root. But for those who have already lost loved ones to foodborne illnesses, these changes come too late. The legacy of poor food safety and sanitation continues to haunt the poorest residents of Victorian London, reminding them daily of the price they paid for the city's progress. As you walk away from the market, you can't help but feel the weight of the situation. The food on the stalls may look fresh, but beneath the surface, it carries the risks of disease and death. The workers, the mothers, the children, none of them can escape the danger that lies hidden in the food they eat. The question lingers in your mind: how many lives will it take before the system changes? How many more must suffer before the true cost of food safety is acknowledged? It is early morning in Victorian London, and the streets are already bustling with activity. The air is thick with fog, a mixture of coal smoke from the factories and the dampness of the river. People are hurrying to their destinations, wrapped in layers of heavy clothing to shield themselves from the biting cold. The city is alive with the hum of industry and the sounds of everyday life. But beneath this energetic atmosphere, there lies a deeper tension, a tension that lingers in every corner of this growing metropolis. As you walk through the crowded streets, you can feel it, the unspoken pressure to look a certain way, to appear clean and respectable. For those who can afford it, cleanliness is a matter of pride, an outward sign of their social status. But for the majority of the population, the pressure to maintain personal hygiene comes at a steep cost. In the crowded slums, where the poor are crammed into unsanitary, overcrowded tenements, the idea of personal cleanliness becomes a distant luxury, a challenge far beyond their reach. Yet, The pressure to conform to these ideals of cleanliness remains ever present, casting a long shadow over the lives of the working class. You see it in the faces of the women walking beside you, their clothes covered in soot from the factories, their hair limp from the dampness in the air. They wear no smiles, only determination as they move quickly through the streets, their eyes averted, focused on the ground ahead of them. They have been taught, since childhood, that cleanliness is next to godliness. Their mothers, their teachers, their employers, everyone has told them that to be dirty is to be immoral, to be a disgrace to themselves and their families. But here, in the heart of the industrial city, cleanliness is a privilege, a luxury that few can afford. For many, the dream of a clean home, clean clothing, and a bath is as distant as the stars in the sky. At the factory gates, you see men and women, their faces tired, their hands calloused from long hours of grueling labor. The men wear soiled, ill-fitting clothing, while the women wear simple dresses that have long since lost their freshness. Their hands are dirty from the constant handling of raw materials, and their shoes are worn thin from the miles they've walked. They are not filthy, but they are certainly not clean in the way that society demands. It is not their fault, not entirely. They have no access to the luxuries of proper baths, soap, or even clean water. The public bathhouses, when they can afford them, are overcrowded and often unhygienic. Many do not have time to clean themselves properly, and for some, the very idea of cleanliness feels as far away as a world that exists only in books. Yet, in the midst of this daily struggle, there remains an invisible yet unyielding force that constantly reminds them of their perceived inadequacies. In the public eye, cleanliness equals respectability. Filth and dirt are associated with moral failure, with lower status, with being less than. You can hear it in the way people speak, the whispers behind closed doors, the judgmental eyes that follow the poor through the streets. Cleanliness becomes a marker of social status, a line that divides the respectable from the unclean. The wealthy classes, with their well-kept homes and private bath facilities, are held up as the ideal. Their homes are pristine, their clothes immaculate, their bodies scrubbed clean by servants. In their circles, cleanliness is not just a matter of hygiene, it is a symbol of virtue, of their moral superiority. The working classes, however, cannot afford this luxury. They are forced to choose between feeding their families and maintaining basic hygiene, a choice that often leads to neglecting one for the other. You watch as a woman enters a crowded market, her hair untidy and her dress frayed from constant wear. She carries a basket of vegetables, trying to make the best of a long day. As she passes, you notice the furtive glances from the women around her. They look at her clothes, at her unkempt hair, at the dust on her shoes, and their expressions shift subtly, eyes narrowing, lips curling into tight lines. There is no spoken condemnation, but the judgment is clear. She is not clean. She does not measure up to the standards that society has set for her. In contrast, the wealthier classes move through the market with an air of assurance, their clothes pristine, their skin washed, their faces devoid of the grime that marks the working class. They walk with their heads held high, immune to the stares of the poor, their cleanliness a badge of honor, an outward display of their superiority. They do not see the woman in the crowd as she struggles to survive, to meet the expectations set by a society that holds cleanliness as a virtue. To them, she is simply a part of the scenery, her presence an uncomfortable reminder of the divide between them. Yet, beneath this social pressure to conform, a growing movement is beginning to form. Public health campaigns, spearheaded by reformers, are starting to raise awareness about the importance of hygiene and sanitation, especially among the lower classes. The wealthier elites are slowly beginning to recognize that a clean society is not just about personal appearance, but also about health and safety. The idea of sanitation as a public concern is beginning to take hold, and there is growing pressure to clean up the streets, regulate food markets, and improve the living conditions in the slums. But while these ideas are gaining ground, they are still met with resistance. Many are reluctant to embrace the changes, fearing that such reforms will upset the status quo. The reformers focus their attention on educating the poor about basic hygiene practices, about the importance of washing hands, keeping living spaces tidy, and the role of proper food storage in preventing disease. They advocate for better working conditions, improved access to clean water, and the construction of public bathhouses. The movement is slowly gaining traction, but it is a battle against deeply ingrained social norms. To many, cleanliness is still a luxury, something that only the rich deserve, and the poor remain skeptical of these newfound efforts. They are told to wash their hands, to keep their bodies clean, but when they return to their overcrowded tenements without proper bathing facilities, the struggle for cleanliness becomes a daily battle. As you walk through the streets of London, you can't help but notice the growing tension between these two worlds: the world of the rich, whose standards of cleanliness have been imposed on everyone, and the world of the poor, whose efforts to stay clean are often thwarted by the very conditions in which they live. The division is stark, and the gap between the two seems impossible to bridge. Yet, amidst the squalor, there is hope. The reformers continue to press forward, and small victories begin to emerge. Public baths are built, food safety regulations are implemented, and new medical knowledge about the spread of disease starts to take hold. But even as the seeds of change are planted, the social pressure to conform to cleanliness remains a powerful force. The poor continue to fight for their dignity, their right to be seen as clean, as worthy, even as they face the overwhelming odds of poverty and disease. And the wealthy, for all their hygiene and cleanliness, remain blind to the struggles of those beneath them, trapped in a system that values their own comfort over the well-being of the working class. In the end, the battle for cleanliness in Victorian London is not just about soap and water. It is about class, power, and the value society places on human life. It is a reminder that hygiene, like any other social norm, is never just about personal preference. It is a reflection of deeper societal divides and the unequal distribution of power and resources. The question remains: will the efforts of reformers be enough to break down these barriers? Or will the poor continue to suffer in the shadows of a city that demands cleanliness but offers little in return? It is a chilly morning in Victorian London, and the city is waking up, its streets slowly coming to life with the sound of footsteps, the clatter of carts, and the cries of street vendors. As the day breaks, the fog that clings to the rooftops begins to dissipate, but the city's other veil, the grime, the soot, the dirt, remains firmly in place. You step out into the narrow, crowded street, the pavement slick with mud and rain from the previous night. The air is heavy with the smell of coal, smoke, food stalls, and the mingling odors of the crowded tenements. The city is alive with its chaotic energy, but you cannot ignore the underlying tension in the air, the silent struggle for cleanliness that defines every part of daily life. As you make your way through the narrow alleyways, the first thing you notice is the lack of clean water. The water in the public wells is murky, contaminated by the waste that is carelessly dumped into the streets. You pass a group of women who are filling their pails from a nearby pump, their faces grim as they collect the precious resource. The water, though essential for survival, is not guaranteed to be safe. They carry it home in large, heavy buckets, each one careful not to spill a drop, knowing that this is the water they will use to drink, cook, and wash with. The access to clean water is limited, and it's a harsh reality for the lower classes. For the wealthy, however, water flows freely from private wells and pumps that are clean and sanitary. But for the working class, the struggle for clean water is an everyday battle. It is not just about hygiene, it is about survival. The lack of access to fresh, uncontaminated water leads to a host of illnesses: cholera, dysentery, and other waterborne diseases that claim the lives of those who are least equipped to fight them. In the poorer parts of London, the risk of disease is ever present, lurking just beneath the surface of daily life. For the workers and their families, hygiene is a luxury they cannot afford. Bathing, a practice once considered a matter of personal care, has become a rare and arduous task. The idea of a daily bath is a distant dream for most. The public baths, which are meant to serve the masses, are overcrowded and often unhygienic. The few available bathhouses are filthy, and the water used is far from clean. You can see the long lines of people waiting outside the bathhouse, the men and women standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces lined with fatigue, some with children clutched to their sides. When they finally step inside, they find the water tepid at best, and the smell of sweat, soap, and dampness fills the air. In the poorer districts, many people can only dream of bathing. Instead, they make do with what they have, wiping themselves down with cold water, using whatever scraps of soap they can afford. There are no towels, no privacy, just the bare minimum to keep their bodies clean enough to face the day. For the children, a full bath is a luxury that may come once a week if they are lucky. More often than not, they are wiped down with a damp cloth, their skin never truly clean, their hair untamed and matted with dirt. The mothers, worn out from the constant demands of work and family, do what they can to keep their children safe from lice and other pests. But there is little time for proper hygiene. You can hear the mothers' tired voices as they instruct their children to wash their hands before dinner, to wipe their faces, but it's a constant struggle. The dirt and the grime cling to them, no matter how hard they try to scrub. And when they go to bed at night, it is in cramped, filthy rooms, their skin still damp from the quick wipe down they managed earlier. They sleep in the same clothes they wore during the day, too tired to even change, too exhausted to care. The bed is small, shared by several family members, and it smells faintly of sweat and dust. There is no escape from the grime that coats every surface, that seeps into every crevice of their life. The wealthier classes, on the other hand, are insulated from these struggles. Their homes are spacious and clean. Their servants take care of the dirty work, and they can bathe regularly in their private tubs. They have access to fresh, clean water at all times, and bathing is an act of leisure rather than necessity. For the wealthy, cleanliness is not just a matter of health, it is a matter of status. The ability to maintain impeccable hygiene is a symbol of their superiority, a mark of their moral and social standing. Their homes are stocked with luxurious soaps, fragrant oils, and fresh linens, and their servants ensure that their bodies are always immaculate. The rich go to private spas, where they soak in warm baths, allowing the water to cleanse them not just physically but spiritually. The wealthy women of London, especially, take great care with their appearance, their daily routines revolving around beauty and cleanliness. They are seen as paragons of grace, with skin as pale and smooth as porcelain, their hair glossy and untouched by the soot of the city. They use cosmetics to maintain their looks, to hide the signs of age or fatigue, and they adorn themselves with perfumes and lotions to smell as clean and fresh as they look. Cleanliness, for them, is not just about hygiene. It is a reflection of their status, their power, and their place in society. For the poor, however, this vision of cleanliness is a far-off dream. The public health system is slow to respond, and the majority of the population is left to fend for themselves in a city that is as filthy as it is bustling. The wealthy can afford to escape to their luxurious homes, where cleanliness is easily maintained, but the poor are left to live in squalor, their bodies worn down by the constant struggle to stay clean in a world that does not care. The divide between the classes grows wider as the wealthy continue to live in their sanitized bubble, while the poor are left to fight a daily battle against dirt, disease, and the overwhelming pressures of life. It is a world where cleanliness is not just a matter of health but a symbol of power, a way to separate the rich from the poor. The wealthy, with their access to clean water, private baths, and luxurious toiletries, are seen as the epitome of civilized society. Meanwhile, the poor are left to live in the dirt, their efforts to stay clean undermined by the very conditions they are forced to endure. In the shadow of this divide, you begin to understand the true meaning of cleanliness. It is not just about soap and water, but about status, survival, and a society that values some lives more than others. As you walk through the city, you realize that the struggle for cleanliness is not just a personal one. It is a social issue, a moral one. The poor, with their lack of access to clean water, their overcrowded living conditions, and their inability to maintain basic hygiene, are the ones most affected by the filth of the city. The wealthy, by contrast, are insulated from these struggles, able to maintain their cleanliness and their status with ease. The pressure to conform to these ideals, to appear clean and respectable, weighs heavily on the shoulders of the poor, who cannot escape the dirt that clings to them no matter how hard they try. In the end, the question is not just how to stay clean, but why some people are able to do so more easily than others. The divide between the classes, between the rich and the poor, becomes a measure of society's values: who is worthy of cleanliness and who is left to suffer in the dirt.
It's a bright morning in Victorian London, but the city's underbelly tells a different story. The streets, once a vibrant collection of bustling vendors and lively chatter, now pulse with an ever-present smell, a sickly mixture of waste, refuse, and industrial fumes. The heavy, acrid air stings your eyes as you walk, the mist of early morning still lingering over the cobbled streets. But it's not the fog that makes you turn your head in disgust. It's the filth, the piles of garbage spilling out of overcrowded bins, the human waste that's been carelessly dumped in open gutters, and the overflowing sewers that run like dark veins through the city. You walk deeper into the heart of the city, your steps quickening as the stench becomes overwhelming. Alongside you, the shops and homes of the wealthier classes are neat and clean, their windows pristine, their doors closed tightly against the world outside. But just beyond the narrow streets, the poorer districts of London open up like wounds in the city's fabric. Here, in the narrow alleys and cramped tenements, the streets are dirtier, the air thicker, and the very ground beneath you seems alive with the silent spread of disease. The city has expanded so rapidly, growing faster than its infrastructure can keep up. The population swells with the influx of workers from rural areas seeking jobs in the factories, but the city's sanitation system, if it can even be called that, has not kept pace with this explosive growth. The once rudimentary systems, designed for a smaller population, are now hopelessly inadequate to manage the mounting waste of an industrial metropolis. People dump refuse in the streets, in gutters, wherever they can find a space to throw it away. Piles of waste are a constant presence, their presence more than just an inconvenience. It's a public health crisis, and it's only getting worse. You pass an open drain, stagnant water flowing lazily down the gutter, its surface slick with a film of refuse. The water has become thick with waste and contaminants, pooling in the streets and infiltrating the homes of the working class. In many parts of London, there is no proper sewage system. Human waste is simply deposited in the open, in chambers that overflow into the streets. The people who live in these areas have no choice but to walk through it every day, breathing in the fetid air, their health compromised by the very environment they must survive in. You see children running barefoot through the muck, their clothes caked in dirt, their faces streaked with sweat. They don't seem to notice the filth. It's just another part of life for them, as ingrained in their world as the air they breathe. The working class, already battered by the demands of factory work and poverty, now faces the ever-growing threat of disease. It is not just the physical toll of their labor that wears them down, but the invisible dangers lurking in the filth that surrounds them. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, these are the diseases that spread easily in such conditions, carried by the contaminated water and waste that flood the city streets. The outbreak of cholera is a constant worry, with each new case serving as a grim reminder of the dangers of London's inadequate sanitation. You've seen the signs before the bodies of the sick, wasted from dehydration, feverish and delirious. Families huddled together, their lives torn apart by the invisible killer that moves through the city like a shadow, creeping silently from one person to the next. The streets, so full of life during the day, are eerily quiet as night falls, the sound of coughing, moaning, and the soft shuffle of the sick filling the air. People know it's coming. They know that cholera could strike at any moment, and when it does, it moves fast. It spreads like wildfire, decimating entire families, leaving homes empty and the streets filled with the dead. But for all the horror that comes with these outbreaks, the city's leaders remain slow to respond. Despite the growing awareness of the dangers posed by the unsanitary conditions, little is done to address the problem. Public health measures are minimal, and the wealthy classes, those who live far removed from the squalor of the tenements, are too comfortable to care. The working class, already marginalized, is left to face the consequences of the city's neglect alone. The government does little to intervene, and the epidemic spreads unchecked. It is only when the death toll climbs, when the bodies begin to pile up, that the government can no longer ignore the crisis. A movement begins to take shape, a call for reform that is led by a small group of passionate individuals determined to bring sanitation to the forefront of public discourse. Among them is Joseph Bazalgette, a civil engineer whose name will eventually be synonymous with the city's survival. Bazalgette sees the problem clearly. The solution, he believes, lies in the construction of a modern sewage system, one that can transport waste away from the streets and prevent it from contaminating the water supply. He understands that without proper sanitation, London will continue to be a breeding ground for disease, and the city's rapid expansion will become its undoing. Bazalgette proposes a bold plan to build a comprehensive sewer system, a system that will span across the city and divert waste into the Thames River, away from the crowded streets where it causes so much harm. It is an ambitious project, one that will take years to complete, but Bazalgette is unwavering in his commitment to the cause. His plans are met with resistance. Of course, many fear the cost of such an undertaking, and others question whether it will even work. But Bazalgette presses forward, convinced that the city's future depends on it. With the backing of a few key political figures, he begins the work of transforming the city's infrastructure. As the work begins, you notice the change. The streets, once choked with waste, begin to clear. The stench of refuse that had once permeated the air begins to lift, replaced by the clean scent of progress. The workers, many of whom had once felt helpless in the face of the filth, now work alongside Bazalgette's team, building the very systems that will protect their families from the disease that has claimed so many lives. There is hope now, hope that the city can recover, that the lives of the poor will no longer be sacrificed on the altar of industrialization. The work is grueling, and it will take years to complete, but as the sewer system expands, the number of cholera cases begins to decline. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the public health crisis eases. The streets are cleaner, the water safer, and the fear of disease no longer hangs over every household. It is a victory, hard won, but a victory nonetheless. And as you stand on the streets of London, you realize that the city is changing. The stench of disease and decay that once defined it is fading, replaced by the clean, fresh air of a city that is beginning to take its public health seriously. The sewer system, though far from perfect, has begun to save lives. And with it, the legacy of those who fought to make it a reality, men like Joseph Bazalgette, will live on, not in the stone and mortar of the city, but in the lives that are no longer lost to the filth of the streets. It's a cool evening in Victorian London, and the city is still bustling, though there's something different in the air. The streets, once heavy with the stench of waste and the disarray of the Industrial Revolution, feel quieter now. The noise of the factories and the rattle of the carts still echo in the distance, but there's a new sense of order, a subtle promise of change. The streets are cleaner than they once were, the air seems a little fresher, and the pervasive sense of sickness, of death looming on every corner, has started to fade into the background. You stand at the edge of a busy street, watching the flow of people pass you by, their faces familiar yet now touched with something else, hope, perhaps, or at least a sense that the worst is behind them. It hasn't always been this way. You remember the days when cholera seemed an ever-present specter, a shadow hanging over every home in the working-class districts. The cries of the sick, the mourning of families as their loved ones fell victim to the disease, these memories are still fresh in your mind. You've walked the streets, witnessed the desperation, the helplessness of a city caught in the grip of filth and disease. The long years of living under the weight of such suffering left a mark on the very fabric of society. It felt as though change would never come, as though the public health crisis would never be resolved. But now, as you breathe in the air, as you see the cleaner streets and the rising number of public health initiatives, you realize that, at last, the tide is turning. It all began in the mid-1800s, with the introduction of the Public Health Act of 1848, a turning point for London and for the rest of England. The act was born out of a growing realization that the city's suffering could no longer be ignored, that the disease and death weren't just accidents of nature, but consequences of poor urban planning, insufficient sanitation, and a failure to understand the basic principles of public health. It wasn't just a matter of convenience anymore, it was a matter of life and death. You can still recall the debates in Parliament, the passionate arguments for reform, as the voices of public health advocates finally reached the ears of the powerful. The Public Health Act was a direct response to the cholera outbreaks, and it marked the first significant step toward change. It was an acknowledgement that the state had a role to play in safeguarding the health of its citizens, not just the wealthy, but the working poor who bore the brunt of the city's squalor. As you walk down the street, you think back to the moment the act was passed. It was a small victory, a single step in what would become a long and hard-fought battle for better public health standards. The act created the General Board of Health, which was tasked with overseeing the public health infrastructure. It gave the board the authority to investigate unsanitary conditions in the city, and most importantly, it paved the way for systematic changes in sanitation practices that would save countless lives in the years to come. But the journey didn't end with the passing of that act. No, this was just the beginning. The real challenge was in the implementation, the hard work of translating those ideas into something tangible, something that would make a real difference in the lives of the people. The city had long been suffocating under its own waste, its streets a maze of filth and disease. Now, there was a clear path forward, but it was one that would require determination, investment, and, perhaps most importantly, public support. The development of sanitation infrastructure became the next critical step. You walked toward the river, the Thames, which had long been the lifeblood of the city but also a source of death. It had been used as an open sewer, its waters polluted with the waste of thousands. The stench that once rose from the riverbanks was unbearable, and the sight of it, of the trash and human waste floating on the surface, was a reminder of the city's disregard for public health. But now, with the passage of the Public Health Act, things began to change. Led by men like Joseph Bazalgette, who would come to be known as the architect of modern sanitation in London, the city started to build the infrastructure it desperately needed. Bazalgette's vision was simple: a comprehensive sewer system that would carry waste away from the streets and into the river, away from the city's population. His plan called for the construction of miles of underground sewers, a vast network that would eventually stretch across London and make it the first city in the world to have a modern sanitation system. You can almost see it in your mind's eye, the construction of those first sewers. The men working tirelessly to dig the trenches, to lay the brickwork, to ensure that the pipes would be large enough to carry the growing city's waste. It was a massive project, one that took years to complete, but it was nothing short of revolutionary. The sewers, once finished, would not just keep the streets cleaner, they would keep people alive. For the first time, the city had a system in place to remove waste before it could contaminate drinking water, spread disease, or contribute to the overcrowding that had plagued the poorest areas. Alongside the sewer system, another critical development was the improvement of clean water supplies. Before the reforms, London's drinking water had been contaminated by sewage and industrial runoff. Public wells were often shared by many, and the water they contained was unsafe for consumption. With the new public health initiatives, however, a reliable system for clean, potable water began to take shape. The city invested in filtration systems, new reservoirs, and pipes that would bring clean water directly to homes and public fountains. This shift not only helped combat the spread of waterborne diseases like cholera and typhoid, but also provided the city's growing population with access to a basic human necessity. As these changes began to take hold, the impact was undeniable. Slowly but surely, cholera outbreaks became less frequent. The death rate dropped, and the population began to live healthier, longer lives. The streets, once choked with refuse, began to clear. People had access to clean water for the first time in decades, and the air, though still thick with industrial fumes, was less toxic than before. You can feel the sense of change in the air as you walk through the city now. The wealthier areas, where the rich had always lived in comfort, now shine with an even greater luster. The poorest neighborhoods, where disease once spread unchecked, are slowly being transformed. There is still work to be done. Of course, still many areas of the city where sanitation and hygiene practices need to improve. But there's hope now. There's a belief that progress is not only possible but happening before their eyes. You think back to the hardships, to the years of sickness and death that shaped this city's history. The early years of reform were slow, met with resistance, and it felt as though the city would never change. But now, standing on these cleaner streets, with the sewers running beneath you and the promise of better living conditions for all, you can feel the legacy of those first public health pioneers. They've laid the foundation for the future of public health, and their work has saved countless lives. The public health improvements of the Victorian era didn't just change London, they set the standard for cities around the world. The lessons learned here in this growing metropolis became the bedrock of modern sanitation practices. Today, cities across the globe owe a debt to the men and women who fought for cleaner streets, healthier living conditions, and the recognition that public health is not just about the wealthy few, but about the well-being of all citizens. As you walk through the city now, the change is evident. The streets are cleaner, the air fresher, and the once overwhelming stench of waste has been replaced with the faint scent of progress. The legacy of Victorian public health reformers like Bazalgette lives on, not just in the bricks of the city's sewer system, but in the health and vitality of the people who call it home. The fight for better sanitation, for clean water, and for public health may have started in the Victorian era, but its effects will continue to be felt for generations to come. It is a cold, dreary afternoon in Victorian London, and the city feels heavy under the weight of its own suffering. The fog that seems to perpetually hang in the air wraps itself around the buildings like a blanket, muffling the sounds of the street. You walk through the crowded alleyways, the cobblestones slick beneath your shoes, and as you move deeper into the city, the smell of dampness and decay grows stronger. It is not just the air that is heavy, but the lives of the people who walk the streets, lives marked by illness, injury, and the constant threat of death. For the people of London, especially those in the working class, life is a fragile thing, constantly at the mercy of disease, injury, and the primitive state of medicine that defines their world. You pass by the small, dimly lit apothecaries and hastily built medical clinics, the faded signs hanging above the doors like forgotten promises. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of chemicals, herbs, and the faint odor of antiseptic, a scent that is still unfamiliar in these early days of modern medicine. In one of the clinics, a doctor leans over a patient, examining a wound, his hands steady but uncertain. Medicine, even in the busiest parts of the city, is still in its infancy. The tools on the doctor's table are rudimentary, at best scalpels that seem too dull for the job, and jars filled with strange mixtures meant to heal wounds or soothe pain. There is no advanced knowledge of germ theory, no understanding of sterilization, and no anesthesia to ease the agony of surgery. You hear the cries of a patient being wheeled out of the clinic, pale and sweat-soaked, their face contorted in pain. It's a reminder of the brutal reality of medical treatment in this time. The practice of surgery is still crude, with limited knowledge of infection or sterilization. Surgeons, often nothing more than barbers or tradesmen who have taken up the profession with little formal training, use knives that are not cleaned between uses, and the risk of infection is ever present. The tools are basic, and many of the procedures are crude. Surgeons rely on their wits and instincts, with little understanding of anatomy or the body's complex systems. In this era, surgery is a gamble. The odds of survival after an operation, especially for those undergoing amputations or procedures on internal organs, are slim. Without anesthesia, patients must endure excruciating pain as the surgeons work quickly, trying to finish before the patient's body gives way. The sound of saws cutting through bone, the smell of burning flesh as a wound is cauterized. These are the grim realities of medical practice at the time. And yet, the people have no choice. When illness strikes, when an injury occurs, the only option is to endure. You see it in the faces of the patients, the wide-eyed terror mixed with resignation, as they prepare for procedures that may or may not save their lives. Despite the brutality of it all, there is a faint glimmer of hope in the air. Medicine is slowly starting to evolve. The early practices of surgery, though flawed, are laying the groundwork for what will eventually become modern medical procedures. The seeds of medical professionalization are beginning to take root. The medical field is moving away from the quackery and superstition that once dominated, and a new generation of doctors is starting to emerge, educated in the principles of science and anatomy. The first medical schools are being established, and a system of formal medical education is beginning to take shape. Still, the majority of doctors are self-taught or have apprenticed under more experienced practitioners. But it is not just surgery that remains crude. Dental care is similarly primitive. The idea of professional dentistry is still a distant dream, and most people in the city go through life with rotting teeth, plagued by pain and infection. If you are wealthy enough to afford it, you may visit a dentist who uses rudimentary tools to pull out a tooth or attempt to fill a cavity with whatever material he has at hand. The wealthy are able to receive the best care, but for the poor, dental issues are simply a part of life. Many have never seen a dentist at all, and the pain of tooth decay is something they are forced to live with until the tooth inevitably falls out. You've seen it in the faces of the workers, their teeth yellowed, their gums swollen and tender from years of neglect. They cannot afford to visit a dentist, and the idea of brushing their teeth with anything other than a simple rag soaked in water seems like an impossible luxury. Children suffer the most. their teeth decaying at an early age due to poor nutrition and lack of care. The idea of dental hygiene is still not widely understood, and there are no toothbrushes to be found in the homes of the working class. The poor make do with makeshift remedies, chewing on sticks, using rags to wipe their teeth, hoping for a reprieve from the constant pain. And then there are the more extreme measures. The use of leeches and bloodletting is still common practice among the medical professionals of the day. Doctors believe that by draining the body of blood, they can cure ailments, from fevers to headaches to even mental illnesses. You've seen the leeches yourself, displayed in jars, their bodies squirming in the murky water. People visit the local apothecary, hoping for a cure, and leave with their blood drained and their spirits low, their bodies weakened by the treatment that was meant to help them. You overhear a conversation in the market between two women, one of whom is discussing how her mother had been treated for a fever by a local doctor who had ordered bloodletting. Her mother had survived, but she had lost so much blood that she was left bedridden for weeks, too weak to get out of bed. The belief in bloodletting and leeching is widespread, despite the fact that more and more physicians are beginning to question its effectiveness. There are whispers of new theories emerging, theories that challenge the traditional understanding of medicine, but they are slow to gain traction. The medical community is divided, and it will take years, decades, in fact, before a true understanding of human anatomy and the role of bacteria in disease will emerge. But in the meantime, the people continue to suffer, trusting in the outdated methods of their doctors, hoping that the treatments they receive will somehow save them. Yet, amidst all this, there is a sense of change in the air. Slowly, medical professionals begin to realize the importance of hygiene. Surgery is becoming cleaner, more precise, and new techniques are being introduced that reduce the risk of infection. Dentists are beginning to use new methods to clean teeth, and some even advocate for the use of toothbrushes. The development of anesthesia offers the promise of painless surgeries, though it will be many years before it becomes widely used. You can see it in the new breed of doctors, their coats neatly pressed, their knowledge of the human body expanding with every passing year. They are the future of medicine, the ones who will revolutionize the field, but for now, they are still learning, still discovering. The early pioneers of modern medicine, though they have not yet fully shaped the future, are already on the path to greatness. And for you, as you walk the streets of London, you sense that this moment in history, this awkward, painful transition from the old ways to the new, is only the beginning. The days of leeches and bloodletting may soon be over, but the legacy of those who suffered, those who lived through the crude practices of the time, will forever be etched into the history of London. In the years to come, you will look back on this time as a moment of transformation, a time when medicine began to take its first tentative steps toward modernity. But for now, as you walk through the streets, you understand that for many, the struggle for survival is a daily fight, one that will continue long after the last leech is discarded. The streets of Victorian London are bustling as usual, but today, there's something different in the air. It's the quiet hum of progress, the dawning realization that something is changing in the world of medicine. The city, once a breeding ground for disease and suffering, is beginning to see the light of new ideas, new methods, innovations that promise to reshape the way people think about health and healing. As you walk through the crowded streets, you notice the changes beginning to take shape. In the distance, the towering spires of new hospitals are rising, places that promise care and hope for those who once had none. These institutions, once dark and unsafe, are slowly becoming beacons of reform, a direct result of the work of medical pioneers who are transforming the field. There are whispers in the streets about new techniques, new approaches that are not only saving lives, but making the impossible seem possible. It's hard to imagine that just a few decades ago, the city was suffocating under the weight of disease. Cholera, typhoid, and smallpox. These were the silent killers that roamed the streets, taking lives indiscriminately. Medical practices were still rooted in superstition and outdated methods. Bloodletting and leeching were common treatments, and hospitals were little more than places where people went to die. But now, as you walk through the alleys and past the bustling markets, you can sense that something is different. The whispers of change are in the air. You think of Florence Nightingale, a name that has become synonymous with the transformation of healthcare. As a young woman, Florence could have easily followed the path laid out for women of her class: marriage, children, and a quiet life in the country. But she had other plans. She saw a world that needed her, a world where the suffering of the sick and dying could be alleviated by something as simple as cleanliness, organization, and compassion. Florence's belief that proper sanitation and a clean environment were essential to healing was revolutionary. She transformed nursing from a poorly regarded occupation into one that was respected and essential to the care of the sick. You remember the stories of her time in the Crimean War, where she worked tirelessly, walking through the makeshift hospitals with her lamp, tending to the wounded soldiers, bringing them not only physical care but emotional comfort. Her work was not just about treating the sick, it was about seeing them as human beings who deserved dignity and respect. She revolutionized nursing, teaching nurses to focus on hygiene, to keep their wards clean, and to treat the body and spirit together. Florence Nightingale's influence rippled across the world, and her work laid the foundation for modern nursing practices. She changed the way healthcare was viewed, showing the world that nurses were more than just helpers, they were essential to healing. As you walk through the city, you think of how different things are now. Bloodletting and leeching were common treatments, and hospitals were little more than places where people went to die. But now, as you walk through the alleys and past the bustling markets, you can sense that something is different. The whispers of change are in the air. You think of Florence Nightingale, a name that has become synonymous with the transformation of healthcare. Smallpox, one of the deadliest diseases of the time, had claimed millions of lives across the world. It was a disease that no one seemed able to stop. Yet Jenner, through a series of brilliant observations, discovered that people who had contracted cowpox, an illness similar to smallpox, but much milder, seemed to be immune to smallpox. He hypothesized that cowpox protected people from the deadlier disease, and after conducting a series of experiments, he proved it. Jenner's work led to the creation of the first smallpox vaccine, and this groundbreaking discovery became the foundation for the field of immunology. You think back to the early days of Jenner's work, to the resistance he faced. Many people were skeptical of the idea of using cowpox to prevent smallpox. It was unheard of, strange, and frightening to some. But Jenner's persistence paid off. His vaccine saved countless lives and laid the groundwork for the development of vaccines for other diseases, including tuberculosis and diphtheria. Today, smallpox has been eradicated entirely, and Jenner's work is considered one of the most important medical achievements in history. The idea that a single intervention could protect people from disease was a revolutionary concept, and it changed the way the world understood the transmission of illness. Jenner's work didn't just impact smallpox. It opened the door to the development of vaccines for many other diseases. The field of immunology grew from his discovery, and over time, vaccines became an essential part of public health efforts around the world. What had once been a mysterious and often fatal disease was now under control, and the world was a safer place because of it. In the midst of all these medical breakthroughs, there was another revolution quietly taking place in hospitals across the country. Surgeons, once confined to rudimentary operating rooms with no knowledge of infection or sterilization, were beginning to embrace new methods. You can feel the shift as you pass by one of the larger hospitals in London. There's an energy in the air, a sense that something is happening here, that change is in the air. This is a place where people come to heal, but it's also a place where the foundation of modern medicine is being built. The introduction of sterilization techniques in surgery is one of the most significant changes. Before the advent of antiseptic practices, surgery was a dangerous and often fatal undertaking. The lack of understanding of germs and infection meant that many people died from simple wounds, and even the most minor surgeries carried a significant risk of death. But with the work of surgeons like Joseph Lister, who introduced the use of carbolic acid to sterilize surgical instruments and clean wounds, the world of surgery began to change. Lister's work, inspired by the discoveries of Louis Pasteur, helped to prove that infection was the result of bacteria, not just bad air or humors as previously believed. You stand in awe of the progress, thinking of the risks that used to accompany even the simplest of operations. Before Lister, surgeries were conducted without any regard for cleanliness. Surgeons would often operate with dirty hands and unsterilized instruments, leading to infections that claimed the lives of countless patients. But Lister's work laid the foundation for modern surgical practices, and his efforts to reduce infections during surgery saved countless lives. He was not the only one, though. The practice of anesthesia, which was still in its infancy, allowed patients to undergo surgery without experiencing excruciating pain, further changing the way people viewed medical care. These early pioneers of modern medicine and public health, Florence Nightingale, Edward Jenner, Joseph Lister, were part of a larger movement that changed the way we think about health and healing. They built the foundation for the healthcare systems that we now take for granted. The hospitals, the nursing profession, the vaccines, and the sterilization techniques, they all owe their existence to the work of these dedicated individuals who refused to accept the status quo, who saw that there was a better way to treat the sick, and who fought to bring those methods to the world. As you walk through the streets of London, you feel a sense of reverence for the work that has been done, for the progress that has been made. The suffering that once defined life in the city has been mitigated, not through miraculous cures, but through the hard work and dedication of pioneers who understood that medicine was not just about treating illness, it was about preventing it. The legacy of those who came before is written in every hospital, every vaccine, and every clean, sterile operating room. And as you look ahead, you know that the future will continue to unfold in the same way. The work of these pioneers laid the groundwork for everything that is to come. What they started has become a movement that spans the globe, saving lives, curing diseases, and reshaping the future of healthcare. The progress they made isn't just about medicine, it's about human resilience, about the relentless pursuit of a better life for all. And you, walking through the city, can feel that change, that progress, happening all around you. It is a bright but chilly morning in Victorian London. The sound of the city awakening is already palpable. The clatter of carriage wheels, the calls of street vendors, the bustling of people in the narrow, fog-filled streets. But as you walk through these busy roads, you realize that amidst the noise, the real work is happening quietly, behind the closed doors of homes and hospitals. The people doing this work, the ones ensuring the health and safety of their families and communities, are often overlooked. It is the women, mothers, wives, nurses, and reformers who are the true unsung heroes of public health in this era. You step into the modest home of a working-class family in the heart of London's East End, and immediately, the difference becomes clear. The air is thick with the smell of cooking, of wood burning in the hearth, and the faint odor of dampness. It is a small house, cramped with children and the daily clutter of life. But there's something remarkable about the way the house is organized. The floors, though worn and marked by the passage of time, are tidy. The windows are cracked, but the curtains are fresh, and there's a sense of order in the chaos of daily life. At the heart of this home stands the mother, a woman who has learned to navigate the harshness of life with grace and tenacity. Her role in this small household is crucial, not just in providing for her family, but in ensuring their health. She is the keeper of hygiene, the one who knows how to sanitize the baby's bottles, clean the clothes, and scrub the floors to keep away the dirt and filth that could make her children sick. She knows that the key to surviving in a city so plagued with disease lies in small daily actions: washing hands before meals, scrubbing the kitchen surfaces after cooking, boiling water before giving it to her children. These practices, simple yet essential, are learned through years of experience and passed down from mother to daughter. As you watch her move through the house, you cannot help but marvel at the importance of her role. She is the guardian of health in this home, though no one ever credits her for it. No medals, no public recognition, just the quiet, steady rhythm of a mother ensuring her family stays safe in an unsafe world. But what's even more remarkable is that the practices she follows, the hygiene techniques she enforces, are the very foundation of public health in Victorian society. And she, like countless other women in this city, is unwittingly shaping the future of health in London. The role of women in public health extends far beyond the home. Women have always been the keepers of health within their families, the first line of defense against disease and sickness. But their involvement in the broader public health movement is just beginning to be recognized. In fact, one of the most important figures in the history of public health is a woman, Florence Nightingale. You've heard her name whispered in the halls of hospitals, and you've seen her face in the newspapers. Her work is becoming legendary, her contributions to sanitation and healthcare undeniable. Florence's journey began with a simple observation. The condition of hospitals during the Crimean War was appalling. As a young nurse, she was appalled by the filth she saw. The hospitals were overcrowded, unsanitary, and disease ran rampant. Patients died not from their wounds, but from infections caused by the filthy conditions in which they were treated. Florence, however, was not content to sit by idly. She saw an opportunity to make a difference, and she did so with a single-minded determination that would change the course of history. Her work began with the basics of sanitation. She understood that to save lives, hospitals had to be clean. The floors had to be scrubbed, the bed sheets changed, and the air must be ventilated. She implemented strict hygiene practices in the wards, washing hands, sterilizing instruments, and making sure that every corner of the hospital was cleaned. She knew that the simple act of keeping the hospital clean could reduce the spread of disease and save lives. Florence's work in the Crimean War was groundbreaking. She became known as the Lady with the Lamp for her tireless work in the hospital at night, tending to the soldiers and offering comfort. But it wasn't just her nursing that changed the course of healthcare. It was her insistence on cleanliness, organization, and proper hygiene. When she returned to England, she used her newfound fame to advocate for better sanitation in British hospitals. She pushed for a reformation of hospital conditions across the country, and her work led to lasting changes that would shape the future of public health. Florence Nightingale's legacy goes beyond her time in the Crimea. Her pioneering work in hospital reform led to the establishment of nursing schools, the professionalization of nursing, and the incorporation of sanitation practices in healthcare systems across the world. What she began, the practice of clean, organized, and humane healthcare, is now the standard. Her impact is felt in every hospital, in every medical facility, in every community where health and hygiene are prioritized. But Florence was not the only woman at the forefront of public health. In fact, women across the country were quietly shaping the future of healthcare, particularly in the area of nursing and domestic health education. Women had long been the caregivers of the household, but in the Victorian era, this role was formalized and expanded as nursing became recognized as a profession. Women like Mary C. Cole, who you've heard about in stories, took on the challenge of healing and helping in times of war. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a businesswoman and a healer who cared for the sick and wounded during the Crimean War. Despite the racial prejudice she faced, Mary C. Cole's impact on public health was undeniable. Her work in nursing showed that women, especially those who had been marginalized, could be just as capable of providing expert care as their male counterparts. In the home, women's roles in domestic health education were just as vital. You think of the women who worked tirelessly to educate their communities about the importance of sanitation and hygiene. They taught others how to keep their homes clean, how to prevent the spread of disease, and how to make simple improvements that could drastically improve health. These women were the backbone of public health before it became a formalized profession, advocating for better living conditions, clean water, and proper waste disposal in neighborhoods that had been long neglected. As you walk through the streets of London, you begin to realize how often women's contributions to public health have been overlooked. They were the first to recognize the importance of hygiene, to demand cleaner homes and hospitals, to teach their families and neighbors how to stay healthy in an era where the scientific understanding of disease was still in its infancy. Their work laid the foundation for the future of nursing, for the public health reforms that would come, and for the very concept of sanitation as a human right. Today, hospitals are cleaner, nursing is a respected profession, and sanitation is a cornerstone of public health. But these advances, these improvements, would not have been possible without the tireless work of women like Florence Nightingale, Mary C. Cole, and the countless others whose names are now forgotten. Their legacy lives on in every nurse who walks through the hospital doors, in every mother who teaches her child the importance of washing their hands, in every public health campaign that educates the community on the basics of hygiene and disease prevention. You realize now that these women, though often invisible in the history books, were the true pioneers. They fought for their families, their communities, and their country, and their work has shaped the world we live in today. Without them, the public health movement would never have gained the momentum it needed to bring about the changes that saved so many lives. And as you walk through London streets, you think of the women who continue this work today. The nurses, the mothers, the activists who carry on the legacy of those who came before them, ensuring that the world remains a cleaner, healthier place for generations to come. The streets of Victorian London are alive with movement, the rush of workers hurrying from one factory to the next, the clatter of horses pulling carts through the wet, grimy streets, and the faint hum of industry everywhere you turn. But the city, though full of life, is also full of death, silent, invisible, yet inescapable. You can feel it as you walk through the alleys and crowded streets, a heaviness in the air that presses down on your chest and your lungs, making it harder to breathe. The fog has always been a part of London, a mist that wraps the city in an eerie veil. But this fog is different. It's thick with the soot of factories, the smoke of burning coal, the byproducts of industrial growth that are both a mark of the city's prosperity and a sign of its disease. The factories, those towering buildings of brick and iron, are the beating heart of the Industrial Revolution. They churn out goods at an unprecedented rate, producing textiles, machinery, and goods that will be shipped all over the world. But at what cost? The answer is clear to you as you walk through the streets. The cost is written on every face you pass, in the weariness of every worker, in the squalor that surrounds you. The streets are choked with waste, with refuse, with the remnants of a society too caught up in progress to realize the cost of it all. You can't ignore the smell, the sickening mixture of sweat, coal, unwashed bodies, and the rotting decay of a city in desperate need of sanitation. As you walk, you see the stark divide between the wealthy and the working class. The wealthy live in their grand homes, nestled in the cleaner, quieter areas of the city. They are sheltered from the worst of the pollution, insulated from the filth that the working class must contend with every day. For them, life is still comfortable, still dignified. But for the workers, those who toil day in and day out in the factories, the conditions are unbearable. The air they breathe is thick with industrial fumes, the water they drink is tainted, and the neighborhoods they live in are overcrowded and unsanitary. The very fabric of the city is falling apart around them, and it's clear that industrialization has brought not just progress, but a public health crisis. You notice the children running through the streets, barefoot, their clothes torn and stained. They are playing in the same streets where waste has piled up, where the smell of raw sewage lingers in the air. You wonder how many of them will survive to adulthood. How many will fall ill from the filth that surrounds them? Cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis, these diseases are rampant in the slums of the city, spread by the unsanitary conditions and lack of proper waste disposal. There is no proper sanitation infrastructure to remove waste from the streets or to clean the water supply. The Industrial Revolution has brought with it a rapid increase in population and a massive strain on the city's resources, but the infrastructure has not kept pace. The workers in the factories are just as vulnerable. They work long hours in cramped, poorly ventilated spaces, inhaling the toxic fumes that fill the air. The factories are a breeding ground for disease, with poor air circulation, no access to clean water, and little regard for the workers' health. They are expected to produce goods at an ever-increasing pace, but their health is sacrificed for the sake of productivity. Many workers suffer from chronic respiratory problems, from exposure to dust and smoke. The air they breathe is thick with particles from the machinery, from coal dust, and from the byproducts of the manufacturing process. In the poorest neighborhoods, children play in the streets and inhale the same toxic air. It is a city suffocating on its own progress. But in the midst of all this suffering, there is a growing awareness that change is needed. Public health movements, led by reformers, are beginning to challenge the status quo. They see the connection between industrial pollution and public health, between overcrowding in factory towns and the spread of disease. The need for change has never been clearer, but the question remains, will those in power listen? Will they act to protect the health of the workers, the very people who fuel the city's industrial growth? As you walk through the crowded streets, you hear the conversations of the workers around you. They talk about the public health reforms that are beginning to gain momentum, about the need for better waste management, for cleaner water, for safer working conditions. There are whispers of a movement, a call for change that cannot be ignored. These reformers argue that the city's public health crisis is a direct result of unchecked industrialization, of a system that values progress and profit over the well-being of its people. You feel the tension in the air. The city is on the brink of something important. The old ways are beginning to crumble, and a new understanding of public health is emerging. There are public health campaigns being launched, with advocates pushing for the construction of proper sewage systems, for better sanitation in the slums, and for the regulation of industrial pollution. For the first time, it seems, the working class is being heard. The wealthy may have the power to ignore the suffering of the poor, but they cannot ignore the growing movement for reform. One of the most important figures in this movement is Edwin Chadwick, a man who has become a symbol of the fight for public health reform. Chadwick is a social reformer who has made it his mission to address the unsanitary living conditions that have caused so much suffering in London. His report on the sanitary condition of the laboring population of Great Britain, published in 1842, is a groundbreaking document that details the connection between poor sanitation, overcrowding, and the spread of disease. It is the first major call for public health reform in England, and it sparks a wave of public interest in improving sanitation. As you walk through the streets, you can almost feel the weight of Chadwick's words. His report details the filth and disease that plague the city, and he argues that a clean city is a healthy city. The sewage system, he insists, must be overhauled to prevent the spread of disease, and clean water must be provided for all citizens. His ideas will eventually lead to the creation of modern sewage systems in London, but it is clear that the fight for public health will be a long one. You see the changes beginning to take place, though they are small and gradual. The first steps toward a modern sanitation system are being taken. New sewers are being built, and public health campaigns are gaining traction. But there is still resistance from those in power, industrialists, politicians, and landowners who stand to lose from the changes that are being proposed. They resist, fearing the cost of reform and the loss of their control over the city. But the voices of the people grow louder, and slowly, the government begins to respond. As you look around, you can feel the weight of history pressing down on you. The city is in the midst of a transformation, one that will eventually lead to the development of modern public health systems that we now take for granted. The connections between industrial pollution, overcrowding, and disease are becoming clearer, and the fight for clean water, sanitation, and safe working conditions is gaining momentum. But there is still much to be done. The changes that are beginning now will shape the future of London and eventually the future of public health worldwide. The lessons learned in this city, the importance of sanitation, the need for proper waste management, the recognition that health is a right for all will become the foundation for modern public health practices. It will take years, even decades, but the fight for a cleaner, healthier city has begun. And with it, the foundation for the public health movements of the future is being laid, one step at a time. It is an early morning in Victorian London, and the city is waking up to the sounds of its familiar chaos: horse-drawn carts clattering over cobblestones, street vendors calling out their wares, and the low hum of industry. The streets are filled with people, some rushing to work, others preparing for the day's business. But despite the vibrancy, there is an undercurrent of something darker, something you can almost feel in the very air you breathe. The streets, though full of life, are also filled with the consequences of rapid industrialization. The stench is unmistakable. The smell of raw sewage, food waste, refuse of all kinds, all mingling with the polluted air. And as you look around, it becomes clear that the very life of the city is threatened by the filth that fills its arteries. The Industrial Revolution, while bringing prosperity and progress, has also brought with it a crisis that no one seems able to solve: the problem of waste disposal. The city is expanding at a rate that no one could have predicted, and with it, the waste generated by thousands of factories, households, and markets is piling up faster than anyone can manage. The growing population of London, now numbering in the millions, is generating more refuse, more sewage, and more garbage than the city's infrastructure can handle. And as the city grows, so does its filth, until it begins to suffocate the very life that pulses through its streets. You pass through a neighborhood, the narrow lanes lined with rickety houses, and you see the piles of refuse building up on the street corners, in the gutters, and spilling out of overflowing bins. The once tidy homes are now surrounded by the detritus of city life. Children play near the piles of waste, their bare feet kicking up the dirt, their faces smeared with grime. They don't know any better, for they have grown up in this environment, where cleanliness is a luxury few can afford. The smell is unbearable, but to them, it's just another part of life. The problem is more than just unpleasant, it's deadly. The waste in the streets is not just refuse. It is a breeding ground for disease. The streets, once the lifeblood of the city, have become its graveyard. In the absence of organized waste removal, the refuse accumulates, rotting in the open air, contaminating the water supply, and spreading disease. You've heard the stories how cholera, typhoid, and dysentery spread like wildfire in the poorer districts, killing thousands each year. The outbreak of cholera especially has become a recurring nightmare, one that the people are powerless to stop. The disease is spread by the contaminated water that runs through the streets, tainted by the very waste that fills them. The lack of proper sanitation is the cause, and the result is the constant death toll that haunts the city. But the authorities are slow to act. The city has no organized waste removal system, no public sanitation infrastructure to speak of. The government is too preoccupied with the growth of industry to address the growing health crisis, and the wealthy, insulated in their cleaner neighborhoods, are largely unaffected by the squalor in the poor districts. It seems that the poor, already suffering under the weight of industrialization, are being left to deal with the fallout of rapid urbanization. The wealthy are shielded by their affluence, but for the working class, there is no escape from the filth that surrounds them. The growing population of London, now numbering in the millions, is generating more refuse, more sewage, and more garbage than the city's infrastructure can handle. And as the city grows, so does its filth, until it begins to suffocate the very life that pulses through its streets. You pass through a neighborhood, the narrow lanes lined with rickety houses, and you see the piles of refuse building up on the street corners, in the gutters, and spilling out of overflowing bins. You see it in the eyes of the children, the mothers, the elderly, their faces drawn with illness, their bodies worn down by disease. And yet, there is a growing awareness that something must be done. There are whispers in the streets, in the taverns, in the public squares. People are starting to demand change. The public health reformers, though few in number, are starting to rise up and make their voices heard. The first attempts at organized waste removal are slow and hesitant. People begin to realize that something must be done to control the refuse that fills the streets. The city starts to implement basic waste management systems. Garbage collection is introduced, and efforts are made to create designated dumps for refuse. But the scale of the problem is so large that it seems impossible to keep up with the ever-growing piles of waste. As the city's population continues to swell, the waste grows with it. You can feel the tension building in the air. There are meetings, debates, and calls for action. Social reformers and public health advocates like Edwin Chadwick are beginning to raise awareness about the need for proper waste management and sanitation. Chadwick, with his report on the sanitary conditions of the working population, is one of the first to recognize that public health cannot be separated from the conditions in which people live. He argues that the lack of sanitation is killing the people of London, particularly the poor, who bear the brunt of the disease. His call for change is not just about cleanliness, it is about life and death. But the challenge of waste disposal is more complicated than simply picking up garbage. The sheer scale of the city, the rapid expansion of industrialization, and the overcrowded living conditions make it a difficult problem to solve. The introduction of a modern sewer system becomes imperative. The waste, after all, is not just on the streets, it is seeping into the water supply, into the air, and into the very homes of the people. The sewage system needs to be overhauled, and London needs to be given a proper waste management infrastructure. As you walk through the city, you hear the names of men like Joseph Bazalgette, the man credited with designing and building the modern sewage system that would eventually save the city from its sanitation crisis. Bazalgette's vision for a system that would divert waste away from the streets and into the Thames River is nothing short of revolutionary. It's hard to imagine, but as you look at the crowded streets, you realize how much Bazalgette's work will change the future of the city. The sewage system he designed will carry away the filth and waste that have been suffocating London, and it will allow for the city to grow and thrive without being choked by disease. The implementation of Bazalgette's sewer system takes years, but as it slowly takes shape, you begin to notice a change in the city. The stench of refuse begins to lift, the streets become cleaner, and the rate of disease begins to fall. The cholera outbreaks, though still devastating, become less frequent as the city's sanitation system improves. People begin to feel that there is hope that London can recover, that it can once again be a city where health and progress can coexist. As you walk through the cleaner streets, you realize how far the city has come. The sanitation crisis that once seemed insurmountable has been addressed, thanks to the work of pioneers like Bazalgette, who refused to accept the city's fate. The modern sewage system is a testament to the power of reform and to the resilience of the people who fought for it. It is a reminder that no problem is too big to be solved and that the health and well-being of the people must always come first. But even as the city continues to grow and evolve, you cannot forget the lessons of the past. The sanitation crisis that once gripped London should not be forgotten, for it is a reminder that progress comes at a cost, and that we must always be vigilant in ensuring that our cities, our lives, and our health are not sacrificed for the sake of growth. The streets of Victorian London are alive with movement, but there's something different in the air today. As you walk through the cobbled lanes, the usual smell of coal, smoke, and dampness clings to the morning fog, but beneath it, there's a sense of change, an energy that hums just beneath the surface. People pass by in a hurry, their faces hardened by the city's struggles, their clothes heavy with soot from the factories that define the industrial age. But something in the conversation around you seems different. Something new is taking root. Whispers of a theory are starting to spread through the markets, through the hospitals, and even in the quietest corners of your neighborhood. It is an idea that promises to change everything. The idea that disease is not just a random curse, but something that can be understood and controlled. You think back to the days when disease was an ever-present threat, when cholera outbreaks would ravage entire neighborhoods and smallpox left scars on the faces of so many. For centuries, illness was viewed as an inevitable part of life, something that struck without reason or warning. The public health crises of the past seemed impossible to fight against. The idea of disease was mysterious, misunderstood, and feared until now. The rising voices of reformers, scientists, and doctors have begun to reveal a new way of thinking, a way of understanding disease that could change the fate of London and perhaps the world. The germ theory of disease, a theory that once seemed so impossible, is now slowly taking root. You can hear the name Louis Pasteur in the conversations that bubble up as you pass by market stalls, as workers file in and out of factories, as doctors discuss their cases. Pasteur's work on microorganisms, the discovery that tiny, invisible organisms are responsible for diseases like cholera, tuberculosis, and rabies, is shaking the foundations of medical science. His theory suggests that diseases aren't random, that they aren't caused by bad air or humors within the body, but by germs, microbes that can invade the body and spread from person to person, contaminating food, water, and air. You feel the growing sense of excitement around you. For the first time, there is hope. Hope that disease can be defeated. In the midst of the city's filth, its overcrowded slums, and its industrialized factories, a new understanding is emerging. The idea that disease could be prevented, that it could be tracked, understood, and even stopped, is nothing short of revolutionary. You walk past one of the hospitals in the city, a place once known for its grim reputation. It's quiet now, with a sense of purpose that wasn't there before. Doctors and nurses move with a renewed energy, no longer simply treating the sick after the fact, but working toward prevention. The dirty, unsanitary conditions that once defined these hospitals are starting to change. You can see it in the faces of the medical professionals. There's a spark of something new. Joseph Lister, a name you hear often in discussions, is one of the pioneers pushing for this transformation. He has taken Pasteur's discoveries about germs and applied them to the world of surgery. Lister's work with antiseptics, the idea that sterilizing instruments and cleaning wounds could prevent infection, is saving lives. His methods are still controversial, and there are many who resist the idea that germs could be the cause of disease. But as you walk through the city, you begin to notice a shift. More doctors are washing their hands before surgery, more hospitals are embracing cleanliness, and the number of post-surgical infections is beginning to decrease. It's not perfect, but it's progress. You think back to the era before this understanding took hold, when a simple cut could become a death sentence because of infection. Surgery was still crude, conducted without sterilization, and the risk of infection was a terrifying reality. You can remember the whispers of people who spoke about surgery as a last resort, knowing that the risk of dying from infection was often greater than the injury itself. But now, with the introduction of antiseptic practices, surgery is starting to look different. It's becoming safer. More and more lives are being saved. As you pass by the bustling streets, you overhear people talking about vaccinations, the new hope for preventing disease before it even begins. Edward Jenner, who first developed the smallpox vaccine, is now celebrated as a hero. The idea that a person could be protected from disease by being injected with a mild strain of it seems miraculous, but it works. Smallpox, once a death sentence for thousands, is now under control, and the idea of vaccination is starting to take hold. The people are beginning to accept that vaccination, like sanitation, is part of the future of public health. What once seemed like a far-off possibility is becoming a reality. As the public becomes more aware of the germ theory and its implications, vaccines start to spread beyond smallpox. Diphtheria, tuberculosis, and other diseases are next in line for eradication. The public's acceptance of the germ theory and sterilization practices doesn't come without resistance, however. There are still many who believe in the old ideas, those who view cleanliness and sanitation as unnecessary or even harmful. The wealthy classes, who have the means to protect themselves, resist change because they don't feel the urgency of the situation. They live in cleaner, more sanitary environments, far from the disease-ridden slums of the working class. They don't see the threat in the same way. Yet, the pressure is mounting from the working class, from public health reformers, and from a growing awareness that disease does not care about class or status. It affects everyone, and the time has come to act. The change is palpable. It's in the air, in the way people are beginning to wash their hands, in the way they are starting to understand that their actions, however small, can have a profound impact on their health. Public health campaigns are spreading, and people are beginning to trust the science behind the germ theory. It is no longer a fringe idea. It is becoming the backbone of modern medicine. You can see the evidence of this progress as you walk through the city's hospitals and streets. The change is not immediate, but it is undeniable. The once dirty, unsanitary conditions that plagued London are beginning to fade. The city is starting to look different. Hospitals are becoming places of healing, not death traps. People are living longer, healthier lives. The public's understanding of hygiene, of the importance of sterilization, is growing. It's not just doctors and scientists who are pushing for change. It's the people, the ones who have been living in the filth for so long, who are finally seeing the connection between cleanliness and health. The impact of the germ theory on public health is profound. It is not just a scientific breakthrough, it is a revolution in the way the world thinks about disease, sanitation, and health. It marks the beginning of a new era, where the fight against disease is no longer just about battling symptoms, but about preventing disease from taking hold in the first place. The germ theory, along with the advancements in sterilization, vaccination, and sanitation, is shaping the future of medicine. As you walk through the streets of Victorian London, you can feel the weight of history on your shoulders. You know that this moment, this shift in thinking, will be remembered for generations to come. It's the beginning of modern medicine, and you are here to witness it. The germ theory has changed everything, and with it, the world of healthcare will never be the same again.
You walk through the bustling streets of Victorian London, feeling the pulse of the city beneath your feet, the sounds of horses' hooves, the chatter of workers and street vendors, the distant hum of industry, all of it melds together to create the rhythm of life in this rapidly expanding metropolis. But there's something else in the air as well. It's not the vibrancy of the city that catches your attention, but the constant hum of something else, the struggle to stay clean in a city choked by dirt, refuse, and waste. London, once a city of quaint cobbled streets and charming lanes, has grown beyond recognition. It has blossomed into a sprawling industrial hub, home to millions of people, all of them moving about, all of them generating waste. The problem of cleanliness, of sanitation, has become an insurmountable challenge. The streets, once kept tidy by a few dedicated individuals, are now overflowing with refuse. The poor districts, in particular, are suffocated by the detritus of industry and the growth of the population. You see it everywhere, the mounds of garbage piling up along the sidewalks, the stagnant pools of water in the gutters, the streets soiled by animal waste and discarded food. The air is thick with the smell of the city's waste-rotting refuse, human filth, and the stink of burning coal from the factories. You've walked these streets before, and each time the same image confronts you. Piles of refuse spilling over the gutters, the pathways blocked by rubbish, the walls of buildings caked in grime. It's a city struggling under its own weight, a city that can no longer keep up with the demands of its own growth. The streets are no longer just the thoroughfares of commerce. They are repositories of waste, sources of disease, and symbols of the city's failure to provide basic sanitation for its people. You stop for a moment and watch a street sweeper at work, a solitary figure with a broom, sweeping the muck off the sidewalk and into a nearby cart. It's a futile task. The piles of rubbish grow faster than one person can clear them, and the very nature of the city's growth ensures that the problem is only going to get worse. This is a new reality. The streets are not just dirty, they are dangerous, disease-ridden places. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, all are spread through the contamination of water sources by the mounds of waste and filth that line the streets and soak into the ground. But it's not just the streets that suffer. The sewers are overflowing, the drains clogged with waste, and the lack of proper sanitation is leading to frequent outbreaks of disease. The stench in the air is a constant reminder that something must be done. The people, particularly the poor, are paying the price for a city that has outgrown its ability to manage its own refuse. The working-class districts are hit hardest. Their narrow alleyways filled with the debris of everyday life. For the rich, the divide is even more apparent. Their homes are cleaner, their streets maintained, and they are shielded from the worst of the disease and filth that ravage the poor. Yet, even they are not immune, as the growing health crisis begins to affect the upper echelons of society as well. It is clear that something must change. You feel a shift in the air, a growing sense that the city cannot continue to ignore the problem any longer. Whispers in the marketplace and in the local taverns speak of the need for reform, for action. There is talk of public health campaigns, of citywide efforts to clean up the streets and improve sanitation, of new systems to manage waste and keep the city free of the filth that clings to its foundations. These are not just idle conversations, they are the beginnings of a movement that will change the future of urban life. The local government, finally beginning to take notice of the growing crisis, is forced to act. The need for a cleaner, healthier city is undeniable. The idea of street cleaning as a method of disease prevention begins to gain traction, and the public health campaigns begin to push for organized efforts to remove waste from the streets. The first steps are slow and hesitant. Street cleaners, men and women tasked with the grim job of sweeping the streets, are employed on a more regular basis. But their numbers are few, and the work is grueling. The streets are simply too large, too crowded, for one or two people to clean. It is a task that requires more than just effort. It requires a complete overhaul of the city's infrastructure. As the local government grapples with the problem, they begin to realize that cleaning the streets isn't enough. They need a more comprehensive solution. That's when the idea of a municipal sanitary department emerges. The idea is simple but revolutionary. A city department dedicated to maintaining cleanliness, ensuring proper waste disposal, and overseeing public health. It is a bold vision, one that will require time, money, and a great deal of effort, but it is the only way to address the sanitation crisis head-on. The establishment of municipal sanitary departments marks a turning point in the city's approach to public health. For the first time, cleanliness is recognized as not just a matter of appearance, but a matter of life and death. The sanitary department takes on the task of ensuring that waste is properly removed, that the streets are cleaned regularly, and that public health campaigns are enacted to teach the public about the importance of sanitation. They begin to implement new waste management systems, bringing order to the chaos that has defined the streets for so long. The push for a modern sewer system intensifies as the government realizes that simply cleaning the streets is not enough. Waste must be properly collected and disposed of, and the threat of disease must be mitigated at its source. You can feel the shift as you walk through the city. The changes, though slow, are beginning to take root. The streets are cleaner, there are more street cleaners, more carts collecting refuse. The air is still thick with the smells of industry, but there is a sense of progress. New public health campaigns are being launched, and people are beginning to take hygiene more seriously. The message is clear. Clean streets mean fewer diseases, fewer deaths, and a healthier, more prosperous city for all. But the work is far from done. The sanitation crisis is not easily solved, and there are many challenges still to face. The city's rapid growth continues to put strain on its infrastructure, and while the efforts to clean the streets are starting to show results, there is still much to be done. The fight against filth, against disease, is ongoing, and the public health campaigns are just beginning. As you walk through the cleaner streets, you can't help but feel a sense of hope. The work of the sanitary departments has already saved lives. The idea of clean streets as a method of disease prevention is beginning to take hold, and the people of London are starting to embrace the importance of sanitation in their daily lives. But you know that the battle is far from over. This is just the beginning of a long, hard fight, one that will take years, if not decades, to fully address. The legacy of these public health reforms, however, will be felt for generations to come. The City of London will become a symbol of how industrialization and urbanization can be tamed with the right approach to sanitation. The lessons learned from this struggle will shape the development of cities around the world, creating a model for urban health that will continue to evolve in the centuries to come.
You find yourself walking through one of the poorest districts in Victorian London, the very heart of the working class slums. The air is thick with smoke from the factories, the acrid scent of burning coal mingling with the stench of human waste that permeates the narrow, overcrowded streets. The sun, hidden behind layers of fog, casts a pale, sickly light on the row of dilapidated homes that line the street. These homes are a far cry from the well-kept mansions of the wealthy. They are cramped, crumbling structures built too close together, their walls leaning in on one another as if struggling to remain upright in the face of neglect. You walk carefully, your shoes splashing in the muck that coats the cobblestone streets. There is no real sidewalk here, just a hodgepodge of rickety wooden planks, which are barely enough to keep you above the filth below. Children run past you, their faces streaked with dirt, their hands covered in grime, and their clothes tattered and torn. They play in the street, oblivious to the dangerous conditions around them, their laughter a stark contrast to the harsh reality of their world. Their homes, if you can call them that, are overcrowded with families. Their living space is so small that there is barely room to breathe, let alone move. The disparity between the wealthy and the working class could not be more apparent. You've seen the grand homes of the rich, with their high walls, well-tended gardens, and pristine interiors. The wealthy live in relative comfort, far removed from the dirt and disease that ravage the lives of the poor. They have access to clean water, private sanitation, and the luxury of keeping their homes free from the filth that defines the lives of the working class. For them, hygiene is a given and expectation. Clean clothes, well-kept homes, and the luxury of bathing regularly are part of their everyday existence. Their lives are marked by a kind of cleanliness, a separation from the squalor that exists just a few streets away. But here, in the slums, hygiene is a distant luxury. The working class, those who live in these cramped, overcrowded conditions, are forced to contend with a world where cleanliness is an afterthought, a struggle for survival. The streets, the homes, and the bodies of the people who live here are all tainted by the relentless tide of filth that has no place to go but into the very heart of their lives. There is no running water, no sewage systems, and no proper waste disposal. Waste is dumped into the streets, and the stench of it is ever present, filling the air, suffocating the inhabitants. Disease is rampant, and yet the people have no choice but to live in these conditions. You can't help but notice how the disparity in hygiene is not just about cleanliness, it's about survival. For the wealthy, cleanliness is a sign of status, a symbol of their superior position in society. But for the poor, it is a matter of life and death. The lack of proper sanitation, the lack of access to clean water, the overcrowding in their homes, it all contributes to the high mortality rates in these districts. Diseases like cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis run rampant through the working class neighborhoods, claiming lives with alarming regularity. The sick and the elderly are the first to succumb, but it is the children who suffer the most. Their small bodies, weakened by poor nutrition and unsanitary living conditions, are vulnerable to every disease that sweeps through the slums. You've seen the small graves in the backyards of these homes, tiny markers for children who never had a chance to grow up. The struggle for better living conditions is a constant one. In the crowded, filthy districts, the working class fights for every scrap of dignity, for every inch of space in their homes. The lack of proper ventilation, the constant dampness, and the absence of sunlight make the homes a breeding ground for disease. The families that live here are forced to share the space, often with little privacy and even less comfort. There is no room to rest, no room to sleep in peace. The walls are thin, and the noise of life in the slums of crying children, of coughing, of constant movement never stops. Yet, despite the harsh conditions, there is a resilience in the people who live here. They do what they can to survive. They boil water even though it may not be clean. They wash their clothes in the rivers or the public fountains. knowing full well that the water is contaminated. They clean their homes as best they can, sweeping the dirt away and trying to keep the worst of the filth at bay. But they are fighting a losing battle. The filth is everywhere. It is in the air, in the water, and in the very walls of their homes. You feel a sense of urgency as you move through these neighborhoods. There is a palpable need for change. The working class residents of London are not asking for luxuries. They are asking for basic human dignity. They want clean streets, clean water, and homes that aren't suffocated by disease and filth. The public health reforms that are beginning to take shape in the city are a direct response to this need. Figures like Edwin Chadwick, who championed the cause of sanitation, are beginning to push for change. His famous report on the sanitary condition of the laboring population has brought the issues of the poor to the forefront of public discourse. Chadwick's work highlights the direct connection between poor sanitation and disease, and his advocacy for cleaner streets, better waste management, and improved living conditions for the working class has begun to spark a movement. Despite the resistance from the wealthy, who fear the cost of reform, the pressure for change is growing. There are murmurs of new sewage systems, new sanitation laws, and public health campaigns aimed at improving the lives of the poor. You can feel it in the air, the hope that change is possible. The working class families who have long been ignored are finally beginning to have their voices heard. They are demanding the right to live in healthier conditions, to have access to clean water and proper sanitation, and to be free from the constant threat of disease. But the road ahead is long, and the fight is far from over. The wealthy classes are still reluctant to make changes that might affect their own comfort, and the city's infrastructure is far from equipped to handle the needs of the growing population. The sanitation crisis is not just about cleaner streets, it's about the very survival of the city's poor. As the cries for reform grow louder, the wealthy and the government are forced to face the reality of their own neglect. And as you walk through these crowded, filthy streets, you realize that the struggle for better living conditions, for proper hygiene and sanitation, is just beginning. The working class may be downtrodden, but they are not without hope. The future of public health in London lies in their hands, and the fight for dignity, for cleanliness, and for survival has only just begun. The public health reforms that are emerging, driven by people like Chadwick, are the first steps toward a healthier future for all. But the question remains, will the city's leaders act in time to save those who are most vulnerable? The fog is thick, swirling through the streets of Victorian London. But today, it feels like there's something different in the air, a sense of change, of something new taking root. You walk through the busy streets, past vendors calling out their wares, past the hustle and bustle of daily life in this industrial city, yet in the midst of the chaos, something is happening. There's a shift, a quiet revolution taking place, not in the factories or the grand homes of the wealthy, but in the very fabric of the people's lives. Public health campaigns are beginning to spread across the city like wildfire, reaching into the hearts of the poorest districts, where hygiene and sanitation were once thought to be luxuries beyond their reach. You can feel it as you walk past the street corners where people stand in small clusters talking in hushed voices. Some are holding pamphlets, others are exchanging the latest news about the growing public health movement. The newspapers, once filled with stories of crime and scandal, now carry stories of reform, of new ideas that are beginning to take hold in the minds of the working class. It's a strange sight for you. A city so entrenched in its industrial identity is now starting to listen to something else. The call for a cleaner, healthier life, the understanding that public health is not just the responsibility of the wealthy, but of everyone. You feel the energy around you, a sense that people are beginning to understand that their lives, their health, don't have to be dictated by the filth that fills the streets. The newspapers, with their bold headlines and urgent calls to action, are playing a central role in spreading the message of public health. You watch as the newsboys shout out the latest headlines, their voices ringing through the streets. The public is beginning to understand the importance of sanitation, hygiene, and disease prevention. The articles aren't just about crime or politics anymore. They are about something more immediate, more vital, their health. The newspapers print stories about the latest medical discoveries, about the importance of keeping the streets clean, about washing hands and boiling water before drinking. They highlight the spread of cholera, the devastating effects of poor sanitation, and the simple yet powerful steps that can be taken to prevent disease. And the people are listening. You hear them talk about it in the markets, in the pubs, In the workplaces, it's no longer just a whisper, it's a conversation, a growing awareness that change is possible. One pamphlet you pick up at a street corner catches your eye. Its message is simple but powerful. Clean streets mean healthy people. Healthy people mean a healthy city. The words are bold, direct, and speak to the very heart of the issue. This is not just about cleanliness for the sake of appearance, it's about survival. It's about ensuring that the working class, the very people who power this city, can live without fear of the diseases that have long been their constant companion. You read further the pamphlet detailing the basic principles of sanitation, how to keep water clean, how to dispose of waste properly, how to clean the body and the home to prevent the spread of disease. These pamphlets are reaching into the homes of the working class, filling a gap that has long been left unaddressed. The people are beginning to understand that they have the power to change their lives, to protect their families, simply by taking small actions each day. But the pamphlets and the newspapers are just the beginning. The public health campaigns that are taking shape are beginning to focus on more than just sanitation. They are pushing for a fundamental shift in the way people think about their own health. Education programs are being implemented aimed specifically at the working class, to teach them about hygiene and sanitation. These programs are often held in community centers or churches, where the working class families gather. You hear the stories of the lecturers, those who stand before the crowds of men and women, trying to instill in them the knowledge they need to protect their families from the diseases that run rampant in the slums. You can almost see the change happening right before your eyes. Families, once too busy or too exhausted to think about hygiene, are beginning to understand its importance. You overhear a conversation between two women standing by the market, one telling the other how she started to clean the floors more thoroughly, to wash her hands before meals, to boil the water she drinks. It seems like such a simple thing, but you realize the magnitude of it. These small steps, these basic acts of hygiene, will save lives. You can see the shift in people's attitudes. What was once seen as a luxury is now becoming a necessity. The idea that health is something that can be controlled, that it is not just dictated by fate, is beginning to take hold in the hearts of the people. The campaigns are also beginning to focus on vaccination. The great breakthrough of Edward Jenner in developing the smallpox vaccine has sparked a movement, and the idea of vaccination is beginning to spread. Once viewed with skepticism and fear, the smallpox vaccine is now seen as a promise of protection, a way to prevent the ravages of disease before they can take hold. You hear the word vaccination being whispered in the streets, in the markets, and in the homes of working class families. The idea that a simple injection could protect their children from the horrors of smallpox is a revelation. They no longer have to live in constant fear of disease, of losing their children to an invisible enemy. The message is spreading quickly. Vaccinate your children. Protect your family. It's a message of hope, of empowerment, and it's beginning to take root in the minds of the public. But not everyone is on board with the changes. The wealthier classes, who have lived insulated from the struggles of the poor, remain skeptical of the need for reform. They are reluctant to spend money on public health initiatives, and some still cling to the old beliefs about disease and cleanliness. However, the growing pressure from the working class is hard to ignore. As more people begin to demand better living conditions, better sanitation, and access to vaccinations, the pressure on the government to act grows. The wealthy, too, begin to realize that disease does not care about class, it spreads indiscriminately, and they, too, are at risk. The public health campaigns are gaining momentum, slowly but surely. The streets are beginning to look cleaner, the people more educated about hygiene and sanitation. There is a new sense of agency in the working class districts. The people are no longer waiting for the government or the wealthy to solve their problems. They are taking matters into their own hands. They are learning, they are organizing, and they are demanding change. It is a long road ahead, but with each pamphlet handed out, with each public health lecture given, the city is moving closer to a future where health is no longer a privilege but a right. As you walk through the streets of London, you can feel the weight of the changes unfolding. There is a growing awareness, a collective sense that the people are no longer passive victims of their circumstances. They are active participants in their own health, in their own survival. The public health campaigns are not just changing the way people live, they are changing the way they think about themselves, their bodies, and their futures. The germs and diseases that once seemed all-powerful are no longer an inevitable fate. They can be fought, They can be prevented, and for the first time, the people of London are beginning to believe that they can be overcome. As you walk through the streets of modern London, the hum of life feels different from what it once was: cleaner, quieter, and safer. The bustling city that had once been a breeding ground for disease now exudes a sense of health, of order. The streets, once choked with waste and filth, are now much cleaner. And though the industrialized air still holds traces of soot and smoke, there is something fundamentally changed about this place. You can feel it in the air and the people around you, in the very fabric of the city itself. It is easy to forget the city's past, its grimy streets, the overcrowded slums, the overwhelming presence of disease that once seemed unstoppable. Yet as you walk through the cleaner parts of the city, passing well-maintained homes, hospitals, and parks, it becomes clear that the advancements that have transformed London and countless other cities around the world owe much to the public health initiatives set in motion during the Victorian era. The battle for public health was not won overnight, but the work done in the 19th century laid the groundwork for the healthcare systems we now take for granted. You think back to those early days when the streets of London were a reflection of the disease and despair that plagued its residents. The very idea that a person could be guaranteed clean water, safe living conditions, and proper medical care seemed far-fetched. The filthy, crowded slums of the Industrial Revolution, with their suffocating air and stagnant water, were places of misery and suffering. People lived in constant fear of disease, knowing that cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis, and smallpox were always lurking just around the corner. But it was during the Victorian era that things began to change. The Public Health Act of 1848, spearheaded by reformers like Edwin Chadwick, marked the first serious attempt to address the city's sanitation crisis. This was the beginning of a revolution in public health, a movement that would eventually shape the very systems of care and hygiene that we rely on today. The act laid the foundation for organized sanitation systems, enabling municipalities to take responsibility for the welfare of their citizens. It was during this period that the idea of municipal responsibility for public health first took root. The government began to recognize that a clean environment, proper waste disposal, and disease prevention were not just luxuries, they were necessities for the survival of the urban population. As you reflect on the changes that took place in those early years, you realize that the advances were more than just about cleaner streets or safer water. They were about reshaping the very way people thought about health. For centuries, disease had been viewed as something mysterious and uncontrollable, something that simply happened to people. But the Victorian reformers, particularly Joseph Bazalgette, who designed the modern sewer systems of London, understood that sanitation was key to stopping the spread of disease. By removing waste from the streets and introducing sewer systems, the city was given a fighting chance against the diseases that had once claimed thousands of lives each year. But it wasn't just the physical infrastructure that changed during the Victorian era. Public health initiatives also focused on educating the population, particularly the working class, about the importance of sanitation and hygiene. Florence Nightingale's work in hospitals during the Crimean War was transformative, bringing the concept of clean, organized, and sterilized care into the forefront of medical practice. She emphasized the importance of proper hygiene in preventing the spread of disease, revolutionizing nursing practices and hospital care. Through her work, Nightingale showed the world that healthcare was not just about curing illnesses, it was about preventing them before they took hold. As you walk through the modern city, you can see the lasting effects of these early reforms. The clean water systems, the well-maintained sewers, the public health education campaigns, all of these have their roots in the public health initiatives of the Victorian period. Vaccination too, which had first been popularized by Edward Jenner in the late 18th century, began to gain widespread acceptance during the 19th century. By the end of the Victorian era, smallpox vaccination was mandatory in some areas, and the groundwork for future vaccination programs was firmly established. The importance of sanitation, vaccination, and hygiene cannot be overstated. As you look around the city, you realize how much has changed since the days when diseases like cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis spread unchecked through the slums. Today, these diseases are rare, thanks to the advances made in public health during the Victorian era. The introduction of vaccines, improvements in sanitation, and the education of the public about hygiene have saved countless lives and transformed society. What was once considered inevitable disease, death, and suffering is now preventable. You stand in awe of the progress that has been made. The city that once seemed so broken, so overwhelmed by its own growth, is now a model of modern urban living. The advancements made during the Victorian era have laid the foundation for the public health systems that now exist in cities around the world. The idea that the government has a responsibility to care for the health of its citizens is no longer a radical notion, it is a fundamental part of modern society. Hospitals, once places of death and despair, are now places of healing and hope. The streets, once filled with disease, are now cleaner and safer. And the people, the poor, the working class, who once had no voice, are now empowered with the knowledge and tools to protect their health and the health of their families. You think back to the early pioneers of public health, to the reformers who fought for sanitation, for better living conditions, and for the right to clean water and proper medical care. Their work laid the groundwork for the healthcare systems we now rely on. Without their efforts, the world we live in today would look very different. The modern concepts of public health and hygiene would not have developed in the same way, and the advances in medical care and sanitation that we take for granted today may never have been realized. The legacy of the Victorian public health movement is felt not only in the clean streets, the safe drinking water, and the hospitals that care for the sick, but in the very way we think about health. The Victorian era taught the world that health is not just the absence of disease, but the presence of systems that support and protect people. It taught us that health is something that can be cultivated, that public health is a shared responsibility, and that every individual has a right to a clean, safe environment in which to live, work, and thrive. Looking back at the advances made during the Victorian era, you realize how far society has come. Diseases that once claimed millions of lives have been eradicated or controlled through vaccines and sanitation. The cities, once overwhelmed by filth and disease, have transformed into cleaner, healthier places to live. Hospitals are now equipped with modern technology and hygiene practices that were unimaginable just a century ago. Public health campaigns continue to educate the public on hygiene, sanitation, and disease prevention, and the lessons of the Victorian period continue to inform the work being done today. As you stand in the heart of the city, looking around at the bustling streets and the people going about their lives, you realize that the legacy of those who fought for public health in the Victorian era lives on. People lived in constant fear of disease, knowing that cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis, and smallpox were always lurking just around the corner. But it was during the Victorian era that things began to change. The Public Health Act of 1848, spearheaded by reformers like Edwin Chadwick, marked the first serious attempt to address the city's sanitation crisis. As you walk through the streets of modern London, it is hard to imagine that only a century ago, these same streets were plagued by filth, disease, and despair. The bustling city you see today, with its cleaner streets, hospitals, and public health campaigns, is the product of centuries of work, of gradual but monumental progress. Their work has shaped the world we live in, and their efforts continue to protect and improve the health of millions. The foundations of modern healthcare, sanitation, vaccination, hygiene, and public health education were all laid by those brave pioneers who refused to accept a world defined by disease and suffering. And as you watch the city continue to grow and evolve, you know that the future of public health will always be rooted in the progress they made. They revolutionized the way society viewed health and medicine, shifting from a time when disease was seen as a mysterious and inevitable force, to a time when health could be understood, controlled, and improved. The Victorian era was not just a period of industrial growth, but also of profound medical and social reform. It was during this time that public health became a fundamental aspect of urban planning and governance, and the idea that a government must ensure the health of its citizens took root. The impact of these reforms can still be felt today in every hospital, every sanitation system, every clean street in the city. The concept of sanitation, which once seemed like an impossible luxury, has now become a basic human right, integral to the daily lives of people around the world. Access to clean water, waste removal, and the prevention of disease have moved from being afterthoughts to central pillars of modern public health. Thanks to the work of pioneers like Florence Nightingale, Edward Jenner, and Joseph Bazalgette, we now live in a world where these basic health standards are the norm, not the exception. Hygiene, once a matter of personal responsibility, has become a societal necessity. We understand now that proper sanitation and hygiene are not just individual concerns, but collective ones essential to the health and well-being of entire communities. The idea that cleanliness could prevent the spread of disease was not just a medical breakthrough, but a social one. It changed the way people thought about their daily routines, their living environments, and the importance of keeping their communities healthy. What was once a struggle for survival has now become a standard practice. Looking at modern medicine, it is impossible to ignore the impact of those early Victorian reforms. The germ theory of disease, introduced by Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, reshaped how we understand and treat illnesses. The fight against infection, once futile, is now a part of every healthcare protocol, from sterilization practices in hospitals to vaccination campaigns that protect people from deadly diseases. Public health initiatives have expanded, ensuring that modern cities have access to clean air, water, and sanitation. Diseases that once ravaged populations are now either eradicated or controlled, and the life expectancy of individuals in urban areas has risen dramatically. Yet, even as we celebrate these advances, we must not forget the challenges that remain. Public health is an ongoing process, one that requires constant vigilance and adaptation. As the world continues to evolve, new challenges arise, whether it be the threat of pandemics, the rise of antibiotic-resistant diseases, or the growing concerns of environmental health. The lessons of the Victorian era, however, continue to guide us. The ongoing importance of hygiene, sanitation, and public health education cannot be overstated. We must continue to learn from the past and recognize that the fight for public health is never truly finished. The reforms that began in Victorian London shaped the world we live in today, but the work is far from over. We must keep pushing for progress, for cleaner, safer environments, and for greater access to healthcare for all. As you look ahead to the future, it's clear that the work done during the Victorian era is far from complete. Just as those pioneers of public health shaped the world we know today, we too have a responsibility to ensure that future generations inherit a world where health is not a privilege, but a right. The legacy of those who fought for public health continues, and it is up to us to carry that torch forward, making sure that the hard-won lessons of the past are not forgotten, but built upon for a healthier, more just future. In the end, the story of public health in the Victorian era is a story of progress, of how a city on the brink of collapse rose from the ashes of disease and suffering to become a model of health and hygiene. It is a reminder that even in the darkest times, change is possible. And it is a call to action for all of us to continue working toward a future where the health and well-being of every person is prioritized, no matter their circumstances or the era in which they live,